In today's culture, we often don't like it when people try to tell us what to do or how to live our lives. You don't own me. Well, today on Daily Renewal, we're going to talk about whose possession we really are. Hello everybody, this is Pastor Lyle and welcome to Daily Renewal. Well, one of the things that I often run into in talking with people is many people don't like the idea of other people telling them what to do. Well, we see this all through even relationships. A lot of people don't want to be treated as an object in a relationship. You don't own me. Or at your workplace, a lot of people don't like the idea of taking orders from anybody else. We want to be able to say the things we want to say when we want to say them, and whether you like it or don't like it, I'm my own man, and I'm going to do what I'm going to do. Nobody's going to tell me how to live or how to do anything. That's often the attitude for a lot of people in this world today. Well, I want to talk to you about a story today about a guy who really didn't have to answer to anybody, and yet his attitude was very different than a lot of people in our culture today. So all this week, we're going to be going through Psalm 23, and when you first look at Psalm 23, there's a couple things you need to know. Number one, Psalm 23 was written by David. Most of the Psalms were written by David. We have to remember that the first part of David's life, he grew up as the younger brother to many of his brothers actually ended up fighting in the army in Israel. And David, as a young boy, before he faced Goliath, he was actually a shepherd boy taking care of sheep. So he, in this idea of Psalm 23, here we see a king now in David. That's the second point we want to see, is he is now a king. He's a man who has the entire nation bowing to him. There's nobody that's going to tell him what to do. And yet David's tendency, as it often was in the Psalms, was to go back and remember those days as a young shepherd boy where, yes, he had responsibilities, but I'm sure it was nothing like it was as a king. But some of the things that he learned as a shepherd, he now wanted to look back and still apply those principles now as the king of Israel. So let's read Psalm 23 today. It says this: "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." Well, the first thing I want to talk about today is how David starts out this psalm. Remember, he's a king. He answers to no one, and yet the first thing he writes here is he says this: "The Lord is my shepherd." Not just a shepherd, but my shepherd. He's acknowledging here that there is somebody above him. The idea of being a shepherd, he knew what that meant. He knew what it was like to be a shepherd. And a shepherd ultimately is the one who has an amount of control over the sheep. And so he says here that he sees himself as a sheep with a shepherd. Now, the analogy here is actually quite amazing when you think about it, because again, for somebody who's made it to the top of the pile, now he's somebody who's longing to have somebody above him that can do the work of a shepherd. So let's take a look. How did he view a shepherd? Well, he knew the idea of him being a sheep and having a shepherd. He was a man, number one, that was a possession of somebody else. A sheep was a possession. It was treated as a possession in that day. So the idea of being a possession, he saw this as a good thing. Why? Because now, with as much responsibility as David had over the kingdom, he longed for the days where he saw himself as a sheep, or he saw himself as a man under authority, because when you look at the idea of what a shepherd did, he understood that as a shepherd, he was responsible to feed those sheep. Well, he saw God as being responsible to make sure that he was cared for in that realm. He also saw as a shepherd that he was a protector of those sheep. And so in Psalm 23, when he regards the Lord as his shepherd, he also was willing to submit himself and say, God, I am under your protection. I give myself to you to protect. Another thing, he also saw God as the one who healed his injuries. Whenever a sheep got injured, whenever a sheep had maybe eaten something he should have, well, who was the one that took care of the sheep? It wasn't other sheep. No, it was the shepherd, David. And he simply was acknowledging also that, God, you're the one who takes care of me when I'm injured. You know, there's so many times where David may have been, maybe not injured on the outside. I'm sure he had physical injuries. But a lot of the injuries that we encounter in our lives are internal. And God is able to help them. He handed all those things over to God willingly. The other thing he understood is, as a shepherd, he was the one who directed the sheep. And how did he direct them? As we hear later, he talks about a rod and a staff. Well, these were some of the tools that a shepherd would use to keep sheep in line. He understood also in the times where sheep got out of line. And if there's anybody that understood about how sheep could get out of line. Now, I don't know if you've ever been around sheep. I haven't been around them a lot. But if it's one thing that I do understand is that sheep have a tendency to want to go on their own and do their own thing. But a good shepherd is able to, at times, comfort these sheep in order to direct them, but also do things in reprimand, or do things to just make sure that the sheep, and sometimes the sheep don't like it, but able to do things to discipline these sheep to stay in line. And why does a shepherd do that? Because ultimately he cares for the sheep. And you know, when we look at the New Testament, Jesus is referred to as the Good Shepherd. In John 10:11 it says, I am the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd gives his life for the sheep. And this is Jesus talking. Jesus ultimately paid the greatest price. For who? For his sheep. You and I, those who chose to give our lives to Jesus to allow him to be our shepherd. So we see here that David totally understood what it was like to be a shepherd. And yet now here he is, a man who has authority over everything. And it's then that he begins to see in his life that he needs to have somebody with authority over him. There is protection in in having somebody have authority over you. You know, in the New Living Translation, in the book of James 1:18, it says this. It says, he chose to give birth to us by giving us his true word, and we, out of all creation, became his prized possession. You know, in a day and age where nobody wants people to have any kind of authority over them, this is the day where we need to understand that we have a God that, yes, he's paid a great price for us. He paid the ultimate price. But why did he pay it? He didn't pay it just so he could be the boss of you. No, he paid it because he sees you as a prized possession. See, when you understand, when you've got, and you may have people in your life that don't treat you as a prized possession, and that's why you don't want to submit to anything. And that's often what happens. But when we understand that the reason that God looks at you and gives the illustration of him being the shepherd, or Jesus being the good shepherd, and us being sheep, It's not because he wants us to be these mindless beings and just kind of herd us like cattle. No, he sees us as a prized possession. And a good shepherd, one who sees the sheep as his livelihood, because let's not forget that for a shepherd, the sheep were everything to him. Yes, he wanted to lay down his life for the sheep because that's how his income came. That's how everything, that's how he sustained himself. That's who he was. Everything a shepherd was summed up in taking care of those sheep. They were prized possessions. And that's what you need to know about how God looks at you. You are a prized possession to him. And he says this, and I've alluded to it earlier. He says, for you were bought with a price. Therefore, glorify God in your body in your spirit, which are God's. You have been bought with a price. And that makes you his prized possession. So don't look at yourself as something that you know what, I'm owned by God. That way I got to listen to all his commandments because they're grievous to me. But you have to see it as this. He paid the price for you because he thought you were worth it. You're a prized possession to him. And David himself, somebody who's had it all, looked at himself and saw himself as a prized possession. As you'll see as we go through the rest of Psalm 23 through this week, he saw himself as a prized possession the same way he used to look at his sheep as being a prized possession to him. Well, I hope you got something out of that today. If you did, I just want to encourage you to subscribe to our channel. Hit the like button. That helps us get the videos out to more people. And feel free to share these videos with as many people as you think that they will help. Also, you can like us on Facebook. We're on Twitter and Instagram as well. If you're in the Kamloops area, feel free to drop by River City Church. We would love to have you. Having said that, God bless you and have a great day.